Challenges facing South Sudan as it confronts renewed violence and a major humanitarian crisis. Joining me for this part of the show from Cambridge in England, Peter Ajak, Sudan team for the International Growth Centre. He's also one of Sudan's storied lost boys among the children displaced by Sudan's civil war. Wenping is Director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with us in the studio, Brian Adeba is Associate Director of Policy for the Enough Project and Advocacy Group for Human Rights. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Peter, there's been a sharp rise in the level of violence in South Sudan. It seems that the peace plan, the peace deal has unraveled, and the opposition leader, Riek Machar, who is the deputy president, has fled the country. What's behind this latest escalation in violence?
Well, the latest violence started, as you very well know, last month, just around the anniversary of the independence. And it seems the main problem really was the presence of two armed forces in the capital, in Juba, both of which are still quite, they're not working together, to put it lightly. And as heading toward the independence celebration, the government put in a lot of checkpoints. And through the checkpoints, the soldiers, they got into a situation of arguments that continued to escalate into fight. And when the two leaders actually met to try to iron out the differences and try to move forward, the same bodyguards again fought. And this fight kept on escalating until the vice president and his forces were then dislodged from Juba. So that's basically how we got into this latest fighting. It seems pretty much the problem was the failure of the security arrangement because the peace agreement envisioned a security force for Machar to be in Juba alongside the forces that are under the direct control of President Salva Kiir. So this arrangement basically fell apart.
Wenping, the United Nations, of course, has a huge presence in South Sudan, a peacekeeping force. Now, the UN has voted to extend the mandate of that peacekeeping force in the country, as well as to add another 4,000 troops to the 12,000 it has there already. Why haven't UN forces been effective in keeping the peace in South Sudan?
Well, we all know even the UN peacekeeping troops had suffered and also caused casualties. Among those casualties, there are two Chinese peacekeepers. So you can see even the peacekeepers themselves, their security now is in the danger. They are also even couldn't protect themselves well. So how could they say to protect those civilians and all those refugees? So in that case, that's why the UN now wants to add more those peacekeeping troops in Juba, and also those peacekeepers, 4,000 more, will be provided by those surrounding, neighboring, those South Sudan neighboring countries. But in terms of this new deal, now they are facing those obstacles coming from South Sudan government. South Sudan government feel very reluctant to accept those new adding 4,000 troops, simply because they think their sovereignty has been also in the danger. Because according to the words given by the President Kiir, they have a very deep doubt about those mission of and also the weapon they are going to use, and also the members. Those peacekeepers coming from which country? For example, those neighboring countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. So they have doubts about particularly the troops coming from Uganda. There are mistrust now among those countries.
Brian, what do we know about the humanitarian situation in South Sudan right now? The situation was bad. Has it got a lot worse?
The situation is very bad now. There are about 5 million people that have been affected and in need of assistance. Over 2.8 million people have been displaced. The northern parts of the country is facing, a serious famine situation. All the aid agencies are warning that the signs are all there for a famine. So in general, in a nutshell, the situation has worsened considerably.
And do you know what's being done to help people who've been displaced?
Well, there's been some help from non-governmental organizations. As expected, the government is nowhere to be seen. In this scenario, it doesn't have the capacity to help the displaced. However, aid agencies are also warning that they need considerable funding to avert a famine disaster in the northern parts of the country and to cater to the 2.8 million who have been displaced. Right now in Juba, there are more than 50,000 displaced within protection sites set up by the UN. So in general, I was at a meeting last week with members of the NGO community here, and they raised the point very well, very clearly, that there is need for assistance and there's need for the international community to step in and donors to step in, especially to help lessen the consequences of the worsening humanitarian situation in South Sudan at the moment.
Peter, when we look at government control in the country, has the power-sharing government effectively collapsed in South Sudan? We had President Salva Kiir, who called for a unilateral ceasefire back in July, on the 11th of July. Was that heeded in any way? Do they have any control over what is happening in the country?
No, of course, the government has a large degree of control in what is happening in many parts of the country. And there are a lot of dialogues now going on in which some members some signatories to the peace agreement believe that the agreement has effectively collapsed, and therefore the transitional government of national unity has collapsed. The opposition leader, Dr. Lamarckol, resigned from his position as a minister in the transitional government. And of course, after Machar left, his party then met in Juba and decided to nominate Taban Dengai as the first vice president, and the president Salva Kiir subsequently appointed him into the position of first vice president. So there is a lot of argumentation going on whether the peace agreement has effectively collapsed or not. My personal view is that the agreement is still in place, and I think this is the same view that is shared by the region, the African Union and the United Nations, and I think it was under that premise that the new resolution 2304, was passed so that the peace agreement can be brought back on track. However, though, what is clearly taking place is that there has since been a power struggle within the IO between a faction that is loyal to Taban Dengai and a faction that is loyal to Machar. And since Machar being ousted from Juba, he has since then resorted back again to using violence as a way of coming back to his old position. So over the last weekend, there was attack in Jonglei State in a place called Pajut. It was attacked by the IO forces, mainly the White Army, civilian militia. The attack, a lot of people were killed, nearly 300 people were killed in this process. And it seems, again, is the same process in which the vice president has kept himself relevant politically in the country, resorting to the means of violence. But now he's technically no longer the vice president, so Taban is the vice president, and the power struggle continues within the IO.
Wenping, China, of course, is heavily invested in South Sudan. Both countries are key economic partners. What kind of influence can China bring in South Sudan to resolve this crisis?
Well, basically speaking, China has played two kinds of a role trying to bring this newborn country now in the right track. So on the one hand, we have paid great attention to this peace building and also trying to bring the two parties together. So on the one hand, we contributed quite a lot. Those peacekeepers joining the UN, the peacekeeper troops, and the blue helmet. For example, even we sent 700 more peacekeepers, and among them, there are 170 more. They are combat troops. This is also a very big step forward in terms of China's engagement in the UN peacekeeping career. So because before we have never sent our combat troops in our peacekeepers in the UN. They are normally the civilian, like engineer and doctor or nurses. But now this time around, we send combat troops, which shows now we really care very much about peacekeeping and security and also peace career in the South Sudan. So this is one point. The second point is we have invested quite a lot in this newborn country, trying to help the local people to improve their livelihood and also to consolidate those economic base for their peace and for their political stability. For example, we have now almost like 100 more those Chinese companies. They are either engaged in the infrastructure building or the communication, or we also offer some economic development assistance to build a school and a hospital, and also like dig the well, because the drought issue is a very serious issue in South Sudan. So all of those works, I think, will have from the two channels trying to help this newborn country.
Brian, with the former Deputy President Riek Machar having fled the country, as we understand, a new Deputy President has been appointed. What are the diplomatic options that are open right now to diffusing this?
Just before I answer that question, I just want to go back to a point that was raised by Peter Ajak about Riek Machar's resort to violence at the moment to remain relevant. I think that we need to take any reports of perpetuation of violence by either of the two parties with a grain of salt. In war, truth is always the first casualty, and especially with particular regard to the situation that he mentioned in Upper Nile at the moment, the White Army at the moment, we need to take their action, their participation in this conflict into consideration. There are long-standing traditional rivalries between the White Army and members of the Dinka community that they attacked in Upper Nile, and we need to take every report of a perpetuation.
Yeah, but there already has been an escalation of violence.
Oh,
right?
yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the security arrangements, the whole greater Upper Nile region right now is in almost in a situation, in a full-blown war. All the reports that we've received indicate that everything has fallen apart in terms of the security arrangements. Coming back to your point about what diplomatic options are there, at the moment, left to their own devices, the two principals to this conflict are not able to get the peace agreement moving forward. I think that the idea that the intervention force will come in and step in is very vital, and I think that's one diplomatic way of getting the peace agreement back on track. However, there are a lot of concerns. It is a joke, actually, in Juba. The UN peacekeeping force, the previous one, it's a well-known joke among the people that it cannot do anything in terms of protecting civilians. And as this intervention force comes in, it needs to look at lessons learned from the previous force.
But I want to give Peter a very quick chance to respond to what Brian has been saying. Peter, when you say that Riek Machar has resorted to the use of force to become relevant in this dispute that is taking place in South Sudan, Brian makes the point that it's far more complex than that, that there has been disputes between different groups in the Upper Nile for quite some time.
No, of course, those disputes has been there, but if you look at them, they have always been reinforced and exaggerated by the political differences. I myself, I come from Jonglei, so the place where the attack took place is only a few kilometers away from my hometown of Wangulei. And I have been in touch with the people on the ground, both on the military side, the civilians and the chiefs, including the authorities of the Jonglei. And this is a clear case. It was a white army that was mobilized, has been mobilized since the clashes broke out in Juba in July. But lately, especially after Riek managed to escape to Congo, they then staged on this attack. It was a very serious attack. 280 people were killed, so nearly 300 people lost their lives. So this is not something that we can speculate about. It's a reality. And if you look at it, why are they attacking at this point? What is the purpose? The purpose is Riek has lost out in the political struggle within the IO, and Taban has taken the upper hand, and Riek wants to create a situation that he still has a huge military following in the country, which is not true. And this is why basically he's resorting to the civilian, so that then he claims that he's relevant again to the country.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us.